For more than 50 years, I believed black men were the reason America was dying. My name is Walter Mercer. I was 68 years old when the beliefs that shaped my entire life began turning against me. I was 14 when my father first took me to a Covenant meeting. The American Covenant operated from a converted repair garage behind an abandoned furniture warehouse. Nothing outside identified the building. Members parked 2 streets away and approached separately so passing police officers would not notice 20 white men entering the same property. That caution was mostly theater. 2 officers attended the meetings themselves. My father drove us there directly from our house. During the 20-minute ride, he explained that I should listen without interrupting because the men inside understood the country better than my teachers ever would. The garage smelled like cigarettes, motor oil, and damp wood. Folding chairs faced a plywood platform beneath an American flag. The speaker that evening was a heavy man named Russell Crane. He never screamed. He spoke softly enough that everyone had to remain silent. Russell said white people were being replaced through immigration, interracial marriage, welfare programs, and declining birth rates. He displayed newspaper clippings whenever the suspect was black and ignored every crime that failed to support his argument. Then he wrote 2 numbers across a chalkboard, 13 and 50. He told us that 13% of the population committed more than half the murders. He never explained the difference between arrests, convictions, reported offenses, and actual guilt. He never mentioned concentrated poverty, unequal enforcement, unsolved cases, or how aggressively police saturated certain neighborhoods. None of us asked. The numbers gave us something better than evidence. They gave us permission. Whenever a black person was killed by police, Covenant members searched court records before the body reached the morgue. A misdemeanor from 8 years earlier became proof of violent character. A marijuana charge became evidence that the dead person had chosen a criminal life. An unflattering photograph became more important than what happened during the shooting. If officers killed an innocent man, we placed the victim on trial afterward. I began repeating those arguments at school. When another student called me racist, I wore the accusation like an achievement. Decades later, when someone used the same word during one of my speeches, I laughed from behind the podium. It is the year 2030. You still say racist like that word should frighten me. The room erupted in applause. By 16, I spent most evenings helping Covenant members produce newsletters and collect photographs from newspapers. We collected photographs of interracial couples and targeted them throughout our newsletters. White women received the worst of it. We called them mud sharks, race traitors, welfare breeders, and every other name bitter men could print inside anonymous pamphlets. Beneath one interracial wedding announcement, I wrote that the bride's children would grow up fatherless and dependent on welfare. Beneath another photograph, I wrote a sentence that appeared throughout our Covenant newsletters. Our people should never mix. That sentence was too blunt for a speech but perfect for propaganda. It required no explanation and invited no argument. It reduced entire families to contamination. My father read several of my newsletter entries and told me I was becoming useful. At 18, I earned the opportunity to prove it. The Covenant called it corrective action. Russell said a black teenager had been seen speaking to the daughter of one of our members. The girl insisted they only worked together at a grocery store, but nobody inside the Covenant cared what she said. The accusation gave us a target, and that was all we needed. His name was Marcus Reed. He was 17 years old. 4 of us followed him after his evening shift. I drove my father's station wagon while Russell sat beside me. 2 younger members waited in the back with jackets pulled over their Covenant patches. Marcus left the grocery store shortly after 10. He walked 6 blocks along Jefferson Avenue, crossed beneath the railway bridge, and entered the residential streets leading toward his mother's apartment. I drove past him, turned right at the next intersection, circled the block, and stopped beside him near a vacant playground. Russell lowered his window and asked Marcus for directions. When Marcus stepped closer, the rear door opened. The 2 men dragged him inside before he understood what was happening. We forced him face down between the seats and drove 18 miles beyond the city. Marcus kept asking what he had done. Russell told him he already knew, which only frightened him more because there was no correct answer he could provide. I watched him through the rearview mirror. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His shoes scraped against the floor whenever the station wagon turned. He tried to make himself smaller, as though taking up less space might persuade us that he deserved to live. His fear excited us. We passed the last occupied farmhouse, continued north for another 7 miles, and turned onto a gravel service road leading to an abandoned limestone quarry. I parked behind a wall of broken concrete where passing drivers could not see the vehicle. We pulled Marcus from the back seat and surrounded him beneath the headlights. Russell made him apologize for touching a white girl. Marcus repeatedly explained that he had never touched her. Russell struck him each time he denied it, teaching him that truth would only increase his suffering. Eventually, Marcus apologized for something that had never happened. That should have satisfied us. Instead, hearing him surrender made us feel powerful. We kept him alive long enough to believe cooperation might save him. We asked about his mother, his school, and whether anyone knew his route home. Every answer helped us understand how completely we controlled what happened next. When the beating ended, Marcus no longer resembled the employee photograph later shown on television. His face looked as though 100 hornets had attacked someone deathly allergic to their venom. One eye had disappeared beneath the swelling. His lips moved, but whatever he tried to say never became recognizable words. I remember kneeling beside him and placing 2 fingers against his neck. His pulse was still present. Russell asked whether we should finish what we had started. I answered without hesitation. He already recognized every one of us. We carried Marcus behind a pile of discarded stone and left him inside a drainage channel. Before departing, Russell removed his wallet and shoes to make the killing resemble a robbery. I drove everyone back into the city using the same route. We stopped at an all-night diner 12 miles from the quarry, washed our hands in the restroom, and ordered breakfast. That detail mattered because it provided witnesses who could place us together somewhere else. Marcus was discovered the following afternoon. The news called him a promising student. Covenant members responded by spreading rumors that he sold drugs, belonged to a gang, and had threatened a white girl. None of those claims were true. Truth had become unnecessary once enough people repeated the same lie. 2 officers connected to the Covenant helped question us. They separated the interviews, avoided asking about the station wagon, and accepted our diner receipts as proof that we could not have been involved. My father shook my hand when I returned home. Russell sponsored my full Covenant membership the following week. During the ceremony, I promised to protect my race, defend my country, and remain loyal to every man inside that garage. For most of my life, Marcus Reed became nothing more than the knight I earned their respect. Decades later, his face would return with enough force to dismantle everything I believed. For the first time, I would remember that night without seeing myself as the man standing above him. I would finally understand the terror of the boy lying beneath me. Marcus Reed's murder did more than earn my membership. It taught me that the law could be shaped by the people entrusted to enforce it. The 2 officers who protected us were not careless men. Officer Daniel Hodge had served for 12 years and received several commendations. Sergeant Paul Brennan supervised patrols throughout the Eastern District. Both understood how to bury a crime without making evidence obviously disappear. They simply redirected attention. Marcus became a suspected gang member. The Covenant supplied photographs of him standing beside black classmates, and Brennan entered several of their names into his report. Hodge claimed an anonymous caller had connected Marcus to neighborhood drug sales. By the time detectives disproved those claims, local news stations had already repeated them. Marcus had never been arrested. That did not stop people from examining his school suspensions, music, clothing, and photographs taken from school yearbooks. One reporter mentioned that marijuana had been found inside the apartment where Marcus lived with his mother and 2 older brothers. The marijuana belonged to one of his brothers, but that distinction disappeared from later broadcasts. A murdered child became a criminal because the truth made too many white people uncomfortable. We celebrated what happened to him, then complained that the media was biased against us. Over the following 30 years, the Covenant expanded far beyond that garage. Hodge recruited officers from neighboring departments. Brennan introduced us to prosecutors, correctional employees, and county officials. We encouraged members without criminal records to join police departments, school boards, and zoning commissions. Russell called it infiltration. I called it taking the country back. We stopped wearing patches in public. We exchanged shaved heads for pressed shirts and respectable haircuts. Instead of shouting slurs outside government buildings, we discussed neighborhood safety inside them. Our language changed before our beliefs did. Black teenagers became urban threats. Immigrants became invading populations. Poor families became irresponsible breeders. Removing them from neighborhoods became restoring community standards. During election years, we distributed selective crime reports without placing the Covenant's name on them. Every photograph showed a black suspect. Every statistic came from neighborhoods where police concentrated their patrols. White offenders disappeared from the comparison. When someone challenged the numbers, I accused them of defending criminals. The strategy worked because fear required less explanation than truth. Immigration enforcement became one of our favorite subjects. We sold shirts praising ICE and joked federal vans provided free transportation south. During raids, Covenant members gathered nearby with coffee and folding chairs, treating frightened families like entertainment. I once told a crowd that ICE was the only government agency improving property value, one household at a time. The applause lasted nearly a minute. When agents separated parents from their children, we said the parents should have considered that consequence before crossing the border. When a white Covenant member was arrested after carrying an unregistered rifle across state lines, we called his separation from his children government persecution. We never recognized contradictions. We recognized enemies. Our favorite political strategist was Everett Slade, a former radio host who built his career by describing black neighborhoods as permanent criminal colonies. Slade demanded mandatory sentences for minor drug offenses and insisted that marijuana possession revealed defective character. I agreed with every word. A small bag of marijuana could remove a young black man from the workforce, separate him from his family, and prevent him from voting in certain states. I considered all three outcomes beneficial. Years later, investors connected to Slade purchased large shares in several cannabis companies. He suddenly described legalization as economic freedom. Covenant politicians supported the change after licensing requirements ensured that wealthy donors controlled most of the market. Black men remained imprisoned for selling what white businessmen now displayed beneath polished glass. I saw no hypocrisy. One group had broken the law. The other had changed it. By then, I was no longer following Russell Crane. I had replaced him. Russell suffered a devastating stroke late in life. While he remained confined to a rehabilitation center, Covenant elders elected me national director. Under my leadership, membership tripled. Our online divisions harassed interracial families, published home addresses, and flooded employers with fabricated complaints. The young members rarely needed direct orders. We taught them who deserved punishment and allowed them to choose the method. Our greatest moment arrived during President Mitchell Vance's re-election campaign. Vance never publicly endorsed the Covenant. He did something more useful. He repeated our language while pretending not to know where it came from. He warned of inner-city predators, immigrant invasions, corrupted bloodlines, and forgotten Americans. At one rally, violence broke out between Covenant members and protesters. Reporters asked Vance to condemn us during a televised debate. He looked directly into the camera. I want the street violence lowered, but every patriot should remain prepared and alert. Inside our headquarters, 40 men stood and cheered. We treated his sentence like military orders. Covenant merchandise carrying the words prepared and alert appeared online before midnight. Vance's campaign denied any connection to us while quietly refusing to demand that we stop using his image. After his victory, funding disappeared from minority business programs, civil rights investigations slowed, and immigration raids increased throughout Covenant-controlled counties. We worshipped him because cruelty sounded legitimate when spoken behind a presidential seal. Not everyone remained silent. A black investigative reporter named Adrian Cole began tracing campaign donations connected to our organization. He discovered that 3 Covenant businesses had transferred money through political committees supporting Vance. He also connected Brennan to altered arrest records and found evidence that Hodge had accessed Marcus Reed's case file without authorization. Adrian contacted me before publishing. He said he wanted to give me an opportunity to respond. I invited him to meet at a Covenant-owned construction office on the western edge of the city. I promised documents proving that our organization had been falsely accused. Adrian arrived alone shortly before 8 in the evening. He carried a recorder inside his jacket and sent his location to his editor. We knew about both precautions because Brennan had obtained a warrant claiming Adrian was purchasing stolen police records. The warrant allowed officers to monitor his telephone. Hodge stopped Adrian 2 blocks from our office. He placed him in handcuffs, confiscated his phone, and drove him through the construction gate in an unmarked vehicle. I watched from the second-floor window as they removed him. Adrian understood immediately. He did not beg like Marcus had. He looked at every face, repeated our names, and described our clothing for the recorder he believed was still hidden inside his jacket. Brennan removed it and placed it on the desk between us. While we questioned Adrian, another Covenant member retrieved his car from where Hodge had stopped him and brought it through the construction gate. Adrian stared at me before saying, "Someone already has everything." That sentence frightened the younger members. Made me angry. We restrained him inside the unfinished building and demanded the location of his files. Adrian refused for nearly 3 hours. We did not need graphic methods. A dark room, controlled breathing, carefully measured pain, and the knowledge that police officers guarded the exits accomplished enough. Shortly before midnight, he gave us the password to his office computer. The files had already been copied. I ordered Brennan to locate them. Then I told Hodge to make certain Adrian never spoke to another reporter. They drove him from the construction site in his own car. I followed with 2 Covenant members until we reached an unfinished section of interstate beyond the county line. We placed Adrian behind the wheel, pushed the vehicle down a steep embankment, and poured liquor across his clothing. The car struck a concrete drainage barrier hard enough to fold the front end inward. Hodge fired 1 bullet through the damaged windshield after the collision. Brennan later claimed Adrian had carried a firearm and attempted to shoot officers who approached the wreck. The newspapers described his death as a drunken crash followed by an armed confrontation. His investigation was published 3 days later. We denied everything. Vance called the report a politically motivated attack. Covenant members posted Adrian's old marijuana citation beneath every article, although the charge had been dismissed 20 years earlier. People debated whether Adrian had been a good man instead of asking why he was dead. The Covenant survived the investigation. Hodge retired with full benefits. Brennan became deputy police chief. 2 politicians named in Adrian's files won re-election. I received a private invitation to the presidential inauguration. For decades, I believed those victories proved we were untouchable. Then my chest began hurting during a speech in Ohio. I dismissed the first pain as indigestion. The second drove me against the podium. By the time my security team carried me through the rear exit and placed me inside an ambulance, I could no longer feel my left hand. At the hospital, a cardiologist explained that years of untreated disease had destroyed most of my heart. For the first time since Marcus Reed entered my father's station wagon, another man decided whether I would live through the night. The cardiologist stabilized me long enough to explain what remained. My heart could no longer pump enough blood to sustain my body. Medication might buy several months, but a transplant provided my only realistic chance of survival. My age and medical history complicated the decision, yet political connections accomplished what Covenant influence had always accomplished. They moved me closer to the front. President Vance's chief of staff contacted the hospital. Senatorial offices requested updates. Covenant members organized blood drives and public prayer gatherings, creating the appearance that thousands of ordinary citizens depended upon my recovery. 6 weeks later, a compatible donor became available. The hospital never gave me his name. Transplant privacy rules protected his family, and I felt no desire to learn anything about them. To me, the donor was not a person. He was replacement equipment taken from a body that no longer needed it. I entered surgery shortly before midnight. When I awakened, my chest felt divided by a line of burning pressure. Tubes entered my arms, oxygen covered my mouth, and machines measured every beat made by the unfamiliar organ beneath my bandages. A nurse noticed my eyes opening. The operation went extremely well. I tried to answer, but the tube in my throat prevented speech. She placed one hand against my shoulder and told me not to struggle. I remained hospitalized for 17 days. Doctors monitored my immune system and adjusted the medications intended to prevent my body from rejecting the transplant. Covenant leaders visited whenever hospital rules allowed it. They brought flowers, campaign letters, and a framed photograph of President Vance. During the first month at home, my recovery followed the schedule provided by the hospital. I swallowed medication at exact hours, recorded my temperature, walked short distances through the house, and returned for regular blood tests. My wife had died 12 years earlier. My adult son had stopped speaking to me after marrying a Mexican-American woman I publicly insulted during an argument. That left Covenant members responsible for my care. Russell Crane's grandson, Caleb, stayed inside my guest room. Caleb was 23, heavily tattooed, and desperate to impress the older members. He prepared my meals, drove me to appointments, and spent the remaining hours attacking people online. One afternoon, I heard him laughing inside the kitchen. He had found a photograph of a white woman holding her black husband's hand beside their newborn daughter. Caleb enlarged the baby's face and began writing comments beneath the image. Normally, I would have joined him. Instead, I stared at the child. A feeling moved through me before I could identify it. It was not affection. It felt closer to fear, but the fear did not belong to someone looking at the baby. It belonged to someone protecting her. Caleb noticed my silence. "You want me to send them something?" I told him to close the page because I needed quiet. He obeyed, although his expression changed. That was the first moment anyone noticed. The music started several nights later. I awakened shortly after 3 and heard a slow rhythm inside the darkened bedroom. A bass line repeated beneath the sound of brushed drums. A man's voice followed, low and weary, singing words I could almost recognize. I checked the television and the radio beside my bed. Both were turned off. The melody continued inside my head. The following morning, I searched for the rhythm on my phone. I spent nearly an hour listening to old recordings before finding a song released in 1992. I had mocked that music throughout my life, yet I recognized the final chorus before hearing it. I knew where the singer would pause. I knew when the saxophone would enter. That should have frightened me. Instead, I replayed the song until Caleb entered the room. He stood inside the doorway and stared at my phone. "What are you listening to?" I lowered the volume and told him it had appeared automatically. He laughed, but I heard suspicion beneath it. Over the following weeks, my listening changed. Early 90s rhythm and blues led me toward soul music, then jazz, then the hip-hop records I once blamed for every violent act committed in a black neighborhood. For decades, I had claimed that rap created criminal behavior. I never applied that reasoning to white musicians who sang about murder, drugs, or abusing women. Their lyrics represented rebellion or entertainment. Black lyrics became evidence against an entire race. I understood that contradiction now. I hated understanding it. My second change appeared during a hospital appointment. Caleb drove me downtown and stopped near the main entrance. While he parked the car, I entered alone and approached the security desk. The guard watched me from behind a computer. When I reached inside my coat for identification, I thought his right hand moved closer to his holster. Perhaps it had, or perhaps I only expected it. My entire body tightened. I slowly removed my wallet, displayed the identification, and explained why I had reached into my pocket. My voice became softer than necessary. I worried that frustration would make me appear aggressive. The guard was black. He had given me no reason to fear him. Still, I felt certain that one wrong movement could end my life and that the official report would explain why I had deserved it. The sensation followed me into the elevator. My palms remained wet. My breathing stayed shallow. I kept replaying the encounter, searching for some action that might have placed me in danger. Then I remembered Marcus inside the station wagon. He had answered every question carefully. He had controlled his voice. He had attempted to make himself smaller. I reached the cardiology floor and vomited into a trash container. My doctors blamed the medication. I allowed them to believe it. The memories became worse after that appointment. Whenever police sirens approached from behind, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. When I noticed store employees following black customers through the aisles, anger arrived alongside a strange familiarity. News footage of police shootings caused pressure beneath my ribs even when the doctors found nothing physically wrong. I began noticing the language reporters used. White suspects had struggled emotionally. Black suspects had criminal histories. White gunmen were troubled young men. Black victims were large, threatening, or no angels. I had helped build that language. Now every carefully chosen word sounded like an accomplice. 3 months after surgery, the Covenant scheduled my return speech at its national headquarters. More than 400 members traveled to hear me. Caleb drove me directly from home and escorted me through a private entrance behind the building. I stood backstage while the audience chanted my name. The speech waited on the podium. I had written it before my transplant. It contained everything they expected: crime statistics, immigration warnings, interracial birth rates, praise for President Vance, and 3 jokes about ICE raids. When the announcer introduced me, I walked beneath the lights. The applause became deafening. I looked across hundreds of white faces and remembered how powerful that sight once made me feel. Those men had followed my instructions. Some had entered police departments. Others had become attorneys, teachers, campaign workers, correctional officers, and federal immigration agents. I had placed hatred wherever authority could conceal it. I opened the speech. The first paragraph blamed black families for destroying their own neighborhoods. As I prepared to read it, the melody from 1992 returned inside my mind. Then Marcus appeared behind it. His swollen face filled my memory. His remaining eye looked upward from the quarry, and for one impossible second, I felt the cold stone pressing against his back. The audience waited. I folded the speech and placed it inside my coat. My doctors warned me against returning this soon. I should have listened to them. I thanked everyone for attending and left the stage after less than 3 minutes. Caleb followed me through the corridor. What happened out there? I told him the medication had affected my breathing. He did not believe me. Neither did the Covenant elders. Their calls began the following morning. Russell contacted me from his rehabilitation facility. Brennan requested a private meeting. President Vance's staff postponed a scheduled photograph without providing another date. I answered none of them. For the first time in my adult life, I stopped watching Covenant broadcasts. I disconnected the computer inside my office and placed my framed photograph of President Vance face down inside a drawer. Then I began driving through the city alone. I told Caleb the cardiologist had recommended independence. In truth, certain streets had started pulling at me. I would leave home intending to purchase groceries and find myself traveling toward neighborhoods I had avoided for decades. One Thursday evening, I followed an unfamiliar melody across downtown. I heard it through my closed windows while waiting at a traffic signal. A saxophone drifted from a narrow building beneath a blue neon sign. Couples entered through a doorway beside a poster advertising live jazz. I parked inside a garage across the street. After crossing the road, I stood outside the entrance for nearly 5 minutes. Every belief I had carried since childhood told me to return to my vehicle. Something beneath my ribs disagreed. I purchased a ticket, passed through the doorway, and followed an usher into the darkened club. The usher led me between crowded tables and seated me near the back wall. I had expected noise. Instead, the room carried the careful silence of people who had come to listen. Small lamps illuminated the tables. Blue light covered the stage, where 4 musicians performed beneath a curtain the color of dried blood. Most of the audience was black. Several people noticed me entering alone. Nobody threatened me. Nobody asked why I was there. Still, I felt exposed without Covenant members surrounding me. I removed my coat and placed it across the empty chair beside mine. The musicians finished an instrumental piece, and the audience applauded. A woman wearing a dark green dress approached the microphone. She appeared close to my age, although the light softened the lines across her face. I recognized the melody before she announced its title. Strange Fruit. I had heard the name throughout my life. I knew it concerned lynching, but I had never listened carefully enough to understand why the song endured. Covenant speakers dismissed it as emotional propaganda used to make white people feel guilty for crimes committed before they were born. That explanation protected us from having to feel anything. The singer began. She did not perform with anger. Her voice carried something heavier. Each line moved slowly through the room, describing terror without allowing the audience to look away from it. A pressure formed beneath my breastbone. At first, I assumed the transplant was failing. I reached for the medication inside my pocket, but my fingers would not close around the container. The stage disappeared. I saw trees illuminated by automobile headlights. Men moved between the trunks while others laughed beyond my vision. Gravel pressed into my knees. A rope tightened somewhere above me. The images did not belong to Marcus Reed. They did not belong to Adrian Cole. They did not belong to me. My new heart began hammering against my ribs. Sweat ran beneath my collar. I attempted to breathe, but every breath stopped inside my throat. The singer's voice blended with the sound of a man pleading somewhere beyond the stage. I pushed away from the table. My chair struck the floor behind me. Several audience members turned as I stumbled toward the aisle. An usher approached, but I raised one hand before he could touch me. I need to get outside. He moved aside and pointed toward the front corridor. I crossed the room while the performance continued behind me. The distance from my table to the entrance could not have been more than 70 feet, yet I felt as though I were escaping the quarry again. This time I was not driving. I was lying behind the broken stone. I reached the lobby, forced open the exterior door, and stumbled onto the sidewalk. Cold air struck my face. I leaned against the brick wall and tried to control my breathing. The song remained audible through the doorway. I covered my ears, but the grief continued inside my chest. For the first time since the transplant, I understood that these emotions were not simply changing my opinions. Something inside me was forcing me to feel pain I had spent my life refusing to imagine. I began crying before I could stop myself. People passed along the sidewalk while I struggled to remain standing. Some glanced in my direction and continued walking. A man across the street stopped completely. He was tall despite the bend in his shoulders. A gray beard covered most of his face, and a dark scar crossed his left temple. He held a paper bag beneath one arm. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he dropped the bag. 2 glass bottles broke against the pavement. I recognized him when he crossed beneath the streetlight. His name was Isaiah Bell. In 2011, Isaiah had worked as a mechanic near one of our headquarters. He saw Covenant members unloading rifles from a delivery truck and reported the license plate to police. The officer who received his report contacted Brennan. 6 members found Isaiah outside a tavern 3 nights later. I was among them. We forced him into a cargo van and drove west for nearly 2 hours. After turning from the highway, we followed an unpaved access road into a stretch of desert used for illegal dumping. We questioned Isaiah about the police report. He admitted making it but refused to apologize. That defiance enraged the younger members. The beating continued until he could no longer stand. I stopped one man from shooting him, although mercy had nothing to do with my decision. A bullet could be traced. An abandoned body would be blamed on exposure, animals, or people involved in narcotics. We removed Isaiah's shoes and coat, destroyed his phone, and left him beside a dry drainage basin more than 90 miles from the nearest town. Nobody returned to confirm his death. I later heard that a truck driver had found an unidentified man along the highway. Brennan could not determine whether the man survived. I decided Isaiah was probably dead and stopped asking. Now he stood directly across from me. He stepped over the broken bottles and approached with both hands clenched. His limp grew more pronounced as he crossed the street. I backed against the wall. Isaiah stopped within several feet of me. "You remember what you did?" His voice remained controlled, but his fists trembled. I told him that I remembered everything. He looked older than 60, although I knew he was only 55. One side of his face rested lower than the other. His left hand could not close completely. "We left you there to die." The words came from me without preparation. Isaiah stepped closer. "You laughed while they broke me." I remembered that too. One member had imitated the way Isaiah dragged his injured leg. I laughed until my stomach hurt. Before entering the van, I told Isaiah that desert animals would clean up what we had left behind. He had remained conscious enough to hear me. Isaiah removed his jacket and placed it on the sidewalk. His movements were slow and deliberate. He intended to beat me, and nothing inside me believed I had the right to resist. I lowered myself onto my knees. The pavement pressed through my trousers. My recent surgical scar tightened as I bent forward, but I remained there. I cannot repair what happened. I cannot return those years. You do not owe me forgiveness, and I will not insult you by requesting it. Isaiah stared down at me. I apologized for abducting him, for helping destroy his body, and for abandoning him where we believed nobody would find him. I admitted that we targeted him because he was black and because we trusted the police to protect us. My voice broke before I finished. Isaiah seized my collar and pulled me forward. His face came close enough that I could see the moisture gathering inside his eyes. "You lived peacefully after that night." I told him that I had. "My children carried me upstairs. My wife washed me because I could not stand. You went home and slept." I could not tell him that sleep had come easily. That truth already stood between us. Isaiah released my collar. He could have struck me. I expected him to. Instead, he stepped backward and studied the old man kneeling before him. "I wanted this moment for 19 years. Now you look too pathetic to satisfy me." He retrieved his jacket and walked toward the broken bottles. I remained on my knees until he disappeared around the corner. A movement reflected inside the jazz club window. Someone stood near the entrance holding a phone. Caleb Crane lowered it when our eyes met. He had followed me from home. Caleb pushed through the club door and stopped beside me. He looked toward the corner where Isaiah had disappeared, then returned his attention to my face. "You apologized to that man." I used the wall to pull myself upright. I did much worse than apologize. His expression hardened. Caleb asked whether my medication had damaged my mind. I told him that my mind had finally begun working. He stepped away as though I had become contagious. The elders need to see this. I did not ask what he had recorded. The phone in his hand already provided the answer. Caleb walked toward a black sedan parked across the street. He entered the passenger side, where another Covenant member waited behind the wheel. The sedan pulled into traffic and disappeared. I returned to the parking garage on foot. The walk took 12 minutes. I crossed 2 intersections, entered through the pedestrian entrance, and climbed the concrete stairs to the 3rd level where I had left my car. Before starting the engine, I called Isaiah's name into an internet search. A repair shop appeared beneath his photograph. He had survived the desert, undergone 6 surgeries, and reopened his business after nearly 3 years of rehabilitation. His wife had died before he returned to work. I could not determine whether her death was connected to what we had done. That uncertainty hurt differently from the guilt I already understood. I drove directly home and entered through the garage. Inside my office, I unlocked a steel cabinet that had remained closed since my surgery. The cabinet contained financial records, photographs, police reports, campaign correspondence, and maps identifying where Covenant victims had been buried. I placed everything across my desk. Caleb's recording would reach the elders before sunrise. By morning, they would know I had betrayed everything they believed I represented. For the first time in my life, I intended to deserve their accusation. I spent the remainder of that night preparing for my final Covenant speech. The documents inside my cabinet covered more than 40 years. Some proved financial crimes. Others connected Covenant members to police departments, political campaigns, immigration raids, and unexplained deaths. Brennan had altered reports in 6 homicide investigations. Hodge had provided private addresses obtained through police databases. Everett Slade had accepted Covenant money before promoting sentencing laws that disproportionately filled prisons with black defendants. President Vance's advisors had coordinated privately with our political committee while publicly denying that we existed. The maps carried worse information. Marcus Reed had been discovered inside the quarry drainage channel, but the Covenant's involvement in his murder remained hidden. Adrian Cole's damaged car had been removed, but his missing recorder and personal belongings were buried near the construction office. Other markings identified victims whose names I never learned. I photographed every page. Then I recorded a confession explaining the symbols on each map, the identities of the officers involved, and my role in both murders. I named Marcus and Adrian before describing exactly how we killed them. I did not request mercy. At 6 that morning, I copied everything onto 3 storage drives. Later that morning, I placed one inside a safe deposit box. I mailed another to Adrian's former editor inside a padded envelope. The third remained inside my coat. I uploaded the files to a dead man's switch program to contact several news organizations, civil rights attorneys, and the FBI. Unless I entered a cancellation password before midnight, it would release everything automatically. The Covenant could still kill me. It could no longer bury the truth with my body. Shortly after sunset, I drove from my house to the national headquarters. The trip took 40 minutes. I parked beside the eastern entrance, passed through security, and followed the main corridor into the assembly hall. Caleb's recording had already circulated. Nobody greeted me. Nearly 500 members filled the chairs facing the stage. Police officers sat beside business owners. Federal immigration agents occupied the front rows. Several politicians watched from a private balcony where cameras could not record their presence. Russell Crane waited behind the curtain. Age had reduced him but not softened him. He sat inside a wheelchair with an oxygen tube beneath his nose. Brennan stood on one side of him. Caleb remained on the other. Russell held Caleb's phone. I watched you kneel before him. I told Russell that Isaiah deserved far more than an apology. Brennan reached beneath his jacket, but Russell raised one hand and stopped him. He explained that my decades of service had earned me an opportunity to address the rumors myself. He expected me to claim illness, medication, or manipulation. Russell believed humiliation could force me back into obedience. The announcer called my name. I walked onto the stage as scattered applause moved through the hall. Nobody stood. Several younger members laughed loudly enough for me to hear them. I placed my written confession on the podium. For several seconds, I studied the organization I had helped build. I recognized men I had recruited as teenagers. Some now wore police uniforms. Others wore expensive suits purchased with money we had raised through fear. I began where they expected. I spoke about sacrifice, loyalty, and the Covenant's responsibility to protect future generations. The laughter stopped. Members straightened inside their chairs, relieved that their leader had returned. Then I told them what we had protected. We protected murderers wearing badges. We protected politicians who sold your anger back to you for votes. We protected wealthy men who demanded prison for marijuana until they discovered how much money they could make selling it. Nobody applauded. I reminded them how we searched the histories of dead black men for misdemeanors because innocence threatened our version of the world. We could excuse any white killer as troubled, misunderstood, or provoked. A black victim needed only one dismissed charge before we treated his death as justified. Several members began shouting. I continued speaking. I admitted that the 13 and 50 argument had never represented honest curiosity. We used it to reduce every black person to selected crime statistics while ignoring how poverty, policing, prosecution, and opportunity affected those numbers. We never wanted explanations. We wanted arithmetic that could hate people for us. A chair struck the floor near the front row. I described our online attacks against interracial families. We had called women mudsharks and race traitors while claiming that white people faced persecution. We called poor families parasites while accepting government contracts, police salaries, political grants, and farm subsidies. Then I addressed the agents seated together. We applauded ICE for separating families. We called children invaders. We joked that detention buses offered free rides south. Yet when one of our men faced prison, we cried about his children before the handcuffs were closed. 2 agents left their seats. Others remained. I looked toward the private balcony and named every politician sitting there. One senator immediately moved away from the railing. Russell's motorized wheelchair moved onto the stage before I could finish. An attendant activated the microphone attached to his wheelchair, allowing his weakened voice to carry through the hall. You have disgraced everything we gave you. I stepped away from the podium and faced him. You gave me permission to become a monster. Russell said I had chosen every action myself. For the first time that evening, he told the truth. I agreed with him. I informed the audience that copies of our records had already left the building. I mentioned the files, recorded confession, and automatic delivery scheduled for midnight. Then I identified everyone involved in the murders of Marcus Reed and Adrian Cole. I also revealed the locations of victims whose bodies had never been discovered. The room became silent. Brennan climbed onto the stage and demanded that I surrender the drive inside my coat. I refused and told him the drive no longer mattered. Russell studied me for several seconds. You may leave here alive. I offer that for the years we shared. I looked at the men surrounding him. You are not sparing me from respect. You are afraid I already told someone. Russell's mouth tightened. I pointed toward the audience and told them that many belonged on an FBI watch list. Then I identified Brennan as a murderer, Caleb as a coward, and Russell as an old man who had trained children to commit the violence he lacked the courage to perform himself. Caleb reached me first. His fist struck my mouth and drove me against the podium. 3 younger members followed him onto the stage. One hit my ribs directly above the transplant scar. Another knocked me to the floor. Russell did not order them to stop. The audience formed a circle as they dragged me behind the curtain. Brennan confiscated my phone and searched my pockets. When he found the storage drive, I began laughing. He asked where I had sent the copies. I told him midnight would answer his question. They carried me through a rear exit and placed me inside a cargo van. Caleb climbed into the back beside me while Brennan drove. Russell remained at the headquarters so witnesses could claim he never left. The van traveled north for 38 minutes. I recognized the route before we passed the abandoned farmhouse. They were taking me to the quarry. Brennan turned onto the gravel service road and parked behind the same broken concrete wall where I had stopped my father's station wagon 50 years earlier. 4 men pulled me from the van. My legs collapsed beneath me. They dragged me across the quarry floor until we reached the drainage channel where Marcus had been left. Recent rain had washed loose stone across the channel, partially concealing the concrete beneath it. Caleb forced me onto my knees in the same place where we had left him. Then he told me what Covenant contacts had discovered about my transplant. The donor's name was Darius Holloway. He was a 41-year-old black music teacher who had died after a delivery truck struck his car. He had played saxophone inside the same jazz club I entered. Early 90s rhythm and blues had been Darius's favorite music. He often played those songs for his daughter before she was born. She was the newborn child in the photograph Caleb mocked during my recovery. Darius had spent his final years reporting racist messages sent to his white wife because of their interracial marriage. Several messages also targeted their unborn daughter. Several had come from Covenant accounts. Caleb leaned closer before telling me that black blood had finally made me weak. He misunderstood what had happened. The heart had not erased the man I was. It had forced me to feel what that man had done. Brennan ordered Caleb to finish it. The tire iron struck the side of my head. The quarry tilted, and the headlights separated into long white shapes. Another blow dropped me where Marcus Reed had once lain. The men continued until I stopped moving. They rolled my body into the drainage channel and covered me with loose stone. Before leaving, Caleb joked that the Covenant had finally removed the blackness from its leadership. At midnight, my files reached the FBI, 3 newspapers, 2 civil rights organizations, and Adrian Cole's former editor. By sunrise, federal agents were entering Covenant offices. Russell called it betrayal. Brennan called it fabricated evidence. Caleb deleted the recording of me kneeling before Isaiah, unaware that his phone had already uploaded a copy. For most of my life, I loved saying that black people made our work easier by killing their own kind. In the end, the Covenant proved that hatred had never made us brothers. They murdered one of their own and buried me where we had once abandoned someone we refused to recognize as human. Beneath my broken ribs, a black man's heart was the last part of me to die.